So I've talked to lots of people about film music and about video game music, and it seems oftentimes people don't really understand exactly what music in that type of medium is actually doing. So how does the music support the story or support the film? And I think a lot of people don't think of it as being something that's supporting the story, but it really is. I mean, I even know people just have this strange misconception about what film music is. I even know some people that have scored some short films, but they still think that the music is supposed to be this thing that stands out and that the audience listens to and is like, oh wow, that music's really great. But in a lot of cases that's not true. Sometimes it's better for the audience never to even really notice the music, but they do walk out of the film or the video game or whatever thinking to themselves, that was a really good story. So how does music go about supporting a story and helping tell things and convey things to the listener or the player of the game or whatever it is? Well, for one, it enhances emotion. That's kind of the obvious one. We know the difference between, oh, this is a happy scene or this is a sad scene. But in a lot of cases, it's not necessarily quite that simple. There's a guy called Sideways on YouTube who did a video about how Pixar makes you cry. It's pretty popular. I have a link down in the description for it. Pixar is known for having these really emotional sounding melodies and such, and so there's even scenes that are kind of happy, but they have this bittersweet feeling, and the music does a great job of kind of enhancing those situations. That's kind of on the more deep level, but on the more surface level, I mean, obviously, this you need to show the difference between, oh, this is an awesome action fighting scene, or, this is a sad scene and whatnot. And there's even some scenes, if you just chopped a little clip right out of some random movie, you probably wouldn't be able to tell exactly what's happening in that particular scene without music there. I mean, it could be, oh, they're crying. Are they crying because they're sad because someone died? Or are they crying because they just heard a funny joke and it was just so funny that they're crying? So you need music to convey those little things. So that would be one of the main things that music does to help support the story. The way more important thing is how themes and leitmotifs are used throughout the film or the video game or whatever the heck it is. This creates a connection to people and to places, and it makes everything way more immersive for the listener or the viewer, because you're seeing things with your eyes, right? And so that's one sense that you're using to take in what's happening. But then you're also hearing things with your ears, too. So you see this one character and you hear this theme. Okay, for example, you see a kid or whatever and you hear this theme, and then there's a time lapse later on and he's an adult or something, and then you hear his same theme. Well then, the movie may have visually cued to you that, oh, he grew up, but also you're hearing his music, his theme that you've heard, so it kind of creates this connection with this character that we've made up here. That's a really important storytelling aspect that only music can do. And a lot of times those themes are really subtle. They're not that noticeable, but it's enough for you to kind of subconsciously associate different characters or places with that music so that you're kind of oriented. In your head, everything kind of makes sense in the context of the story. But how does this actually play out in real films and video games and such? Well, Nerdwriter put out a really great video on the music in Lord of the Rings. I'll also have a link down to that in the description. But basically what he talks about is how there's all these themes and leitmotifs at the very beginning of the film, and they develop throughout the film, which is very key, that you have these themes that aren't necessarily, oh, here's this person's theme, let's play the whole theme. You need things to develop and grow with the character, right? Because you don't know everything about your characters at the beginning of your story. You learn about them as they go. But Lord of the Rings is an excellent example of that. For example, in Nerdwriter's video, they talk a lot about the Fellowship theme and how it kind of fragments and how it comes back together at the end and breaks apart as the actual Fellowship breaks apart, comes back together, and blah blah blah. And Lord of the Rings isn't the only great example of how this all works. One of my personal favorite scores is the How to Train Your Dragon score. I think that movie and the score especially is extremely underrated, and everyone should appreciate it more, but I mean, that score does a great job of developing themes between Toothless and Hiccup, and then also the romance theme, how it's introduced at the very beginning and then you don't hear it again until they're flying over the clouds and such. It's really, really cool how these ideas develop throughout the course of the story, and I think it does an excellent job of supporting the film. But this also applies to video games, like I was saying earlier. For example, in The Legend of Zelda Wind Waker. I think that game has fantastic music. It's probably got the best music in any Zelda game, in my humble opinion. But what's so good about this music is it does a great job of... It's a little different because it's not film, so emotionally it kind of puts you into whatever scene you're in. So the Zelda game's about adventure, and you travel all over, and you go to these different places. And so what it does is whenever you get to said place, you have music that kind of anchors you in that particular moment. That way you know, like, oh, I'm in a very dangerous dungeon, I need to be careful, or I have to solve these puzzles. Or it's like, oh, this is nice, light and happy music, I'm in this cute little town. But the music in video games like this also does a great job of connecting with the player, and connecting the music to people and to places, of course. This is a very big deal in video games, especially with older games, because they didn't have much data storage and whatnot, so things repeated a whole lot. And so, like, you heard this one character's theme or this one area theme, and it's like super iconic in your memory. And that kind of became a staple thing that happens in video games, which I think is awesome. Those limitations actually ended up creating something better, like a higher art form unintentionally. But these are all just a few examples of how music is actually supporting a story. The music isn't necessarily there to be this crazy epic thing that makes you think, oh wow, this music is awesome. In a lot of cases, it's there just to support what's happening. For some reason, there's always this big debate against like Hans Zimmer versus John Williams and their two music styles. Because there's always this big thing about, oh, John Williams is this amazing composer, he has these crazy good melodies, and he does, they're always very memorable and very interesting. But that's kind of his style, and that's also a bit of an older style of scoring films. Hans Zimmer, his melodies oftentimes aren't quite as memorable as the stuff John Williams writes, but I don't necessarily think that means his film scoring is worse necessarily. I will say that a lot of Hans Zimmer music does start to sound a bit similar, but then again, I can't say too much because he's Hans Zimmer and I'm just some dude making YouTube videos. But I think his music does an excellent job of conveying what's happening on the screen. It never goes out of its way to like take attention away from the movie. It always supports the film and supports the story, which is really what a film composer should be doing. And that's what good scoring really is.